The hallway rug was misaligned. She'd fixed it twice already. At first, it had been a subtle crookedness at the corner, something that set her teeth on edge each time she passed. By the third glance, she knew it had to be corrected. She straightened the fringe against the hardwood, feeling the stiff fibers beneath her fingers, the faint creak of the floorboards beneath her weight. She took a step back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. The rug seemed right for a moment. Then, a soft brush of sound, like the whisper of cloth sliding over floor, reached her ears from the far end of the hall. She froze. The house was otherwise still, the ticking of the wall clock a distant, measured pulse. She glanced toward the rug. It had shifted, a subtle skew, the kind that seemed impossible without interference. She knelt again, pressing it flat, smoothing the slight ridge with her palm. She listened, holding her breath, waiting for the creak or the whisper to repeat. Nothing. The air was heavy, scented faintly of the wax polish she'd applied that morning. The hall seemed wider than before, the dim light from the sconce bouncing off the walls at an angle that made the shadows lean inward. Satisfied, she rose and continued toward the kitchen, heels clicking in measured taps. Behind her, the hallway waited. She didn't look back. Hours later, she returned. The rug had shifted again. Not dramatically, just a subtle rotation, as if the house itself were testing her patience. Her fingers traced the edge, pressing it back into place. She could feel the faint give beneath the rug, like a floorboard slightly hollowed. She tapped it with her heel. Nothing, just the dull thud that should have been normal. But when she stepped back, the rug was off-kilter again. A cold prickle ran along her spine. She crouched, dragging her palm along the fibers. They resisted, a stubborn tension in the weave, almost as if the rug had memory, recoiling and settling at a slightly different angle each time she touched it. Her fingertips tingled. The hallway stretched long and narrow, the wallpaper's floral pattern now twitching at the edges, just in her peripheral vision. The house seemed aware. She could feel it in the air, a quiet pressure, as though the walls themselves leaned closer with every correction. The sconce flickered, not quite enough to betray the bulb, more like a pulse, a subtle shift in light. She rubbed her eyes and blamed fatigue. She slept fitfully that night. The rug, she thought, would be straight in the morning. She woke to the smell of faint mildew, like wet fabric, and the dull weight of air pressing against her chest. The hallway light had not yet turned on. She stepped out of her bedroom. It was misaligned again. This time, the skew was more pronounced. The corner near the stairwell lifted slightly, a whisper of shadow curling underneath. She bent to press it down, fingers brushing the hardwood beneath the rug. Her skin prickled. The floor was warmer than usual. Not hot, just an uncomfortable warmth that seemed to radiate upward, pressing her fingers against the fibers with subtle insistence. A noise, almost inaudible, drifted from the walls. A faint scraping, like nails along plaster. She jerked back, heart hammering, and the rug quivered beneath her hand. She told herself it was the house settling. Old houses had quirks. Nothing more. She straightened it again. This time, she stayed on her knees a moment longer, pressing, feeling for whatever subtle resistance had caused the rug to shift. Her gaze caught movement at the far end of the hall, light flickering across the baseboards, a dark shadow where none should be. The hallway wasn't empty. She rose, footsteps hesitant, breath shallow. The shadows receded when she looked directly, but the hair along her arms refused to lay flat. The rug was flat now, corners aligned, fringe straight. She took 3 steps toward the kitchen, then froze. The rug shifted beneath her feet. Slowly, deliberately, she bent, pressing down once more. It resisted, a subtle swell beneath her palm, like a heartbeat buried under fiber and wood. Her hand recoiled. She whispered to herself, reassured herself, but even as the words left her lips, she knew the hallway was no longer passive. She tried to ignore it. Hours passed. She heard the faintest creak of floorboards when no one walked, the soft friction of cloth against floor that didn't belong to her movements. She began noticing other things, the wallpaper, slightly off in pattern alignment. Picture frames that hung straight the day before now tilted just enough to unsettle. And always the rug. She straightened it again that evening. Each correction felt heavier, like the act itself demanded attention, as if the house would allow no casual dismissal. She laid it flat, smoothed the fringe, stepped back. The hall was quiet, a small victory. Her hands shook as she reached for her tea mug, the ceramic warm against her fingers. She glanced toward the hallway mirror, an old piece oval framed in dull brass, and for a moment the reflection showed the rug misaligned. She blinked. It was impossible. She turned and the rug was straight. The hair on her neck bristled. Something in the reflection lingered, elongated shadows along the edges, subtle bulges at the corners of the hall, almost as if the walls themselves were breathing. She stepped back. The rug remained aligned. The reflection did not. She tried reasoning. Perhaps fatigue. Perhaps a trick of light. The sconce's glow was weaker, throwing shadows differently. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the rug was off again. Her chest tightened. She sank to her knees, pressing the rug flat. She smoothed it meticulously, running her hands along each edge, flattening every crease. It resisted slightly, a gentle rise beneath her fingers, like a pulse from beneath the floorboards. A whisper tickled the corner of her ear, so soft she could barely be sure she heard it. Not yet. She froze. The air thickened, carrying a scent she could not place. Smoky, damp, metallic. Her ears strained. No mechanical hum, no draft. Only silence, pregnant and waiting. The rug lay flat at last. She rose slowly, trembling, palms clammy. The hallway looked empty. The wallpaper pattern aligned. The picture frames hung straight. And yet, she could feel the presence, subtle and deliberate, brushing against her awareness. She walked toward the living room. Each step was slow, deliberate. The hardwood underfoot felt unnaturally solid, the slight hollow warmth gone. She dared not glance back. Hours later, she returned to check once more. The rug lay perfectly aligned, corners straight, fringe flat. She exhaled in relief, though her body remained tense. Then, beneath her heel, she felt the faintest give. A hollow, tiny, rhythmic pulse. She froze. Slowly, she bent to inspect, fingers brushing the fringe. The rug twitched. The corner lifted just slightly, curling upward. Beneath it, a shadow pooled, darker than the hall could hold, shifting with a subtle intelligence. Not random, purposeful. The walls seemed to lean closer. The sconce flickered once, twice, casting long, moving shadows that were not her own. Her breath caught. The rug shifted again. She could feel it tugging, insisting. She pressed down, fingers trembling, and it pressed back. Not with resistance exactly, but with awareness. The shadow pulled deeper. It reached slowly for the edge of the rug. The house was listening, watching, waiting. And then, in a sudden, imperceptible movement, the rug lay flat, still, perfectly aligned. She stepped back, chest heaving. The hallway seemed normal again. Too normal. But when she dared glance down one last time, she noticed the shadow's outline. A faint, dark shape, pressed just beneath the fibers, curling at the corner, as if it had been waiting for her to turn away. The rug remained aligned. The house waited. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was only the beginning. Her bedroom window was open, but the screen was still intact. I noticed it just after I climbed into bed, pulling the comforter up past my chin. The evening air had been warm when I locked the door, yet now a thin chill slipped around my ankles. I froze for a moment, listening. The house was quiet, quieter than usual, as if it had folded in on itself. My window, which I could have sworn I had closed before leaving the kitchen, was ajar just enough to let a sliver of moonlight spill across the floorboards. I sat up slowly, letting my eyes adjust. The room smelled faintly of linen and dust, the familiar scent that always made this room feel like my own. The light from the street lamp outside traced the edges of the open window, glinting off the brass latch. I reached for it. The window was light. The old metal hinges groaned faintly as I touched them. The screen was in place, taut and undisturbed. No tears, no bent edges, no gaps. I exhaled, telling myself I must have left it open earlier, perhaps when airing out the room. My fingers brushed the screen. It was solid, unyielding. Yet the air that drifted in carried a strange precision. A quiet, almost deliberate current that pressed gently across my face, as if the window had decided which parts of the room should feel its touch. I lay back down, but the air seemed heavier now. Not cold, exactly, but weighty, as if the room were breathing slowly around me. The familiar shape of my desk chair cast a long shadow across the floor, and for a brief instant, it seemed to lean forward, closer to the window than it should. I shook my head. Shadows can't move on their own, I reminded myself. A soft sound reached my ears. A faint scrape, barely there, like fingernails along wood. I froze, straining to listen. The room was otherwise still. The air tugged at the curtain, pulling it slightly outward before it settled back. I could feel it moving in patterns I could not predict, brushing along the edge of my desk, across the floor. I climbed out of bed and approached the window. My fingers traced the edges of the screen again. It was physically intact, solid. I tapped the frame, no give, nothing. I tried the latch locked exactly as it should be. Yet the pane itself had shifted slightly, a subtle tilt I could not remember when I left it. The frame pressed unevenly against the sill, imperceptibly at first, then unmistakably. I leaned closer, nose almost touching the glass. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the tang of copper, though nothing in the room had changed. A whisper of movement along the edge of my vision made me turn sharply. The shadows in the corner seemed to quiver, tiny waves that could have been tricked light or something else entirely. I stepped back. My heart beat a little faster. The window wasn't letting anything in. It wasn't inviting the world inside. Felt protective, like it was letting something out. Something that had been contained behind the pane, behind the screen, and now could roam in measured breaths across the floorboards. I pulled the comforter tighter and returned to bed. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses shift, windows settle, shadows dance. But every time I moved, I felt the current shift in response, sweeping around my body, tugging at the sheet across my chest. My legs tingled as the cold traced along the edge of the comforter. I thought about shutting the window. My hand hovered over the latch. Something stopped me. It was as though the window had grown aware of my intention, resisting with a subtle pull in the air that made my skin prickle. I lay back down, watching the moonlight stretch across the floor. The room felt different now, larger somehow, yet more constricted. The walls pressed closer without moving. The chair at the desk seemed to be just outside the field of light, its shadow leaning toward me again, though I had not moved. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt stretched and soft. I could hear the faint hum of night insects outside, but their rhythm felt off, delayed, as though the night itself was listening, waiting. The air around the window shifted again, brushing my cheek and throat, brushing softly against the edges of my eyelids. I could feel it even when I closed my eyes, a delicate pressure that moved in arcs and lines I could not follow. I fell asleep at some point, only to wake suddenly. My chest felt tight. My room was silent. The window was open. The moonlight had changed angle, though I had not moved. The shadows were still, yet more precise, more deliberate. I could feel the space around me like a skin stretched tight. I approached the window again. Screen intact. I pressed it firmly. Solid. I tried to close it. The latch offered no resistance, yet the pane would not sit flush in the frame. The smallest gap remained, enough to let a whisper of air through. A slow, deliberate current that tugged at the edge of the comforter, tracing across the floorboards with unerring accuracy, as if it knew where every object in the room rested. I stepped back and studied the room. The shadows shifted in the corners, brushing along walls and furniture in patterns I could not trace. The room felt alive, but not with movement. It was aware of me, aware of my position. It measured my attention and responded. The air seemed to coil, pressing against my ears, my neck, and the small hollow behind my knees when I knelt. I wanted to leave the room, wanted to step into the hall and slam the door behind me. But my body refused. My eyes kept returning to the window, to the small space between pane and frame. I realized I was not afraid of what might come in. I was afraid of what had already left. I lay back down once more. The air swirled lightly, brushing against my temple. I told myself it was the night breeze. I told myself the house creaked. I told myself shadows moved in imperfect light. But the rhythm of the air was too deliberate, too knowing. I felt it tracing the shape of the bed, sliding along the walls, circling me in patterns that made the floorboards hum faintly underfoot. And then, as my eyelids grew heavy, I realized the final truth. The window had been open when I entered the room earlier. I would have noticed, surely. I was careful, meticulous. Could not have been open. Yet the screen was untouched, the latch locked, the pane perfectly aligned on its edges, except for the tiniest imperceptible tilt that I could not explain. I closed my eyes. When I woke, I could not remember whether I had closed the window at all. The room smelled faintly metallic. The moonlight cut a narrow line across the floor, and the shadows in the corners seemed to pulse slowly. The air traced along the edges of the bed like a finger, deliberate and patient. I do not know if it was the window that opened, or if it had only been waiting for something inside to leave. The screen remained intact, and yet, I feel it around me still, brushing lightly across my skin, tracing the spaces I move through, aware of my breathing, waiting for the moment I am careless enough to notice again.